This is CNN Breaking News.
Holy. Oh my God! That scene there played out in an American high school classroom today. Those are teenagers on the floor under their chairs and desks, screaming as gunshots were fired.
I heard about 5, 6 gunshots. We thought they were firecrackers because it sounded like them. We weren't sure what was used. And we heard the police yelling. We heard banging on the doors.
17 Julia 5, I have the gunshot victim.
I was in third floor upstairs, and then we just heard gunshots. And then me and my friend ran outside the class. We ran downstairs, and then right after that, I looked back up, and he got shot in the head. So I just ran to a different class.
Right below me on the first floor, I heard shooting, and I saw 2 guys running. I went to make a right, and I just ran, and I had my book bag on my back just in case I got shot from the back. It would go through my book bag and my books. I ran to where there were students and teachers, and we went to Wesley's, and then I jumped the fence, and I just ran.
February 14th, 2018, Parkland, Florida, Marjory Stoneman Douglas High. Hello, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and this is the Suzanne Atwell Show. Our focus, back to school, a new safety bill, and the uniquely Floridian consequences of insufficient mental health care and pro-NRA gun policies. As another class of students return, the enthusiasm of a new year is dampened by the shadow of 17 murders and the fear that it will happen again. Our best hope, though, in a rare moment of political unity, our state lawmakers came together and passed what is perhaps the most comprehensive school safety bill in the nation, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. Senate Bill 7205 is a comprehensive act that includes provisions for tougher gun controls to help keep guns away from dangerous and violent individuals, allows courts to prohibit violent or mentally ill people from buying or possessing a gun. It raises the age to purchase or own a gun from 18 to 21, bans stocks that increase rapid-fire rates, and creates a 3-day waiting period for all firearm sales. To improve safety in our school, the bill requires a law enforcement officer in every school. Like fire drills, all schools must hold drills and provide training every semester for students, faculty, and school threat assessment teams. Requires so-called school hardening measures such as metal detectors, bulletproof glass, steel doors, and security cameras. The act also seeks to improve early warning and mental health policies, like a new mobile app that allows students and the members of the community to anonymously report dangerous threats or suspicious behavior. Requires every school to have and train a team that meets monthly to review and assess potential threats. Requires every student in Florida to have access to a mental health counselor. Requires crisis intervention training for all school resource officers. And the bill calls for more statewide health service teams to help youth with early or serious mental illness. On March 9th, Governor Rick Scott signed the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act into law. Scott was obviously moved by the demands of the angry, heartbroken parents who lost children and students who lost friends.
I called on the legislature to give me a bill that will allow us to make our schools far safer, allowing for much greater law enforcement presence and for hardening our school buildings. This bill does that. I called on the legislature to give me a bill which provides more funding for mental health services. This bill does that. I called on the legislature to give me a bill which gives us the ability to seek restraining orders to keep guns away from people with mental health problems and for people who are in danger to themselves and others. This bill does that. I asked for a bill which would ban bump stocks and raise the age to purchase a gun from 18 to 21. And this bill does that. I want to conclude on one final point. I know the debate on all these issues will continue, and that's healthy in our democracy. People are passionate in their beliefs, and they should be. But we should not insult or disparage each other. We should work together to make our schools safe for our kids. We have a lot of work ahead of us in order to enact these reforms and make our schools safer. This is the time for all of us to come together, roll up our sleeves, and get it done.
Scott's decision to sign represented a dramatic course change for a staunch National Rifle Association advocate. Hours after the bill went into law, the NRA filed suit saying the bill violated the Constitution's Second Amendment. But the power of public opinion had prevailed. Florida legislature had spoken, and the governor did not succumb to the NRA's strong-arm lobbying efforts. Preparations for the new act in Sarasota County Public Schools has been intense and at times controversial. From an academic perspective, Sarasota County is one of the top districts in the state. But reaching an agreement with a divided school board while managing the dramatic changes the new safety bill requires, not a simple task. In 2017, the district served over 43,000 students and 5,000 staff. Not including special and charter schools, the district includes 21 elementary, 8 middle, and 5 high schools. And the district is one of only 2 in the state that have received an A rating for the past 15 years. We have a lot to be proud of and a lot to keep track of. With that in mind, we asked the newly hired Chief of Police for Schools, Paul Grahowski, what has been done to meet the School Safety Act law?
So we had, I'd like to say, a good head start on the legislation that came and mandated all the schools in Florida to do what we're doing now. We have since then allocated over $25 million towards the physical infrastructure hardening of our schools to include fencing, cameras. We've had an additional 2,200 cameras added since the end of last year to our school district. We have single access point lobbies in construction, under construction, or completed, depending on the varying
Single
degrees.
access for all schools?
For all schools, for all visitors. So we're funneling all of our visitor traffic to a single point through our lobbies. There's a saying that we've developed: what we're doing is not about adult convenience, it's for child safety. And I kind of like that. And so it's going to be inconvenient for a little bit. It's going to be different. There's going to be some marked changes for the parents that have gone to the varying schools throughout our district. I'm sure everybody has habits, that they have routines and they like to park in certain places and walk certain paths, but for the purposes of the safety of our most precious commodity, our children, we have to make it a little inconvenient for people to have full access to our campuses.
Also working on security is Mike Andreas, Executive Director of Safety. I asked Mike about the newly mandated threat assessment teams.
And each of our safety teams will be comprised of, they'll have a representative of any job function that's on our campus. So we'll have kitchen staff, we'll have counselors, we'll have speech therapists, we'll have coaches, we'll have teachers, we'll have substitute teachers, because they look at problems a little bit differently when they come in.
Sure.
And so we will have a wide range of people that, and we will ask them to commit to the safety committee for that year at least. We'd like to keep them on, kind of thing. And our safety committees will be required to meet at the school site 4 times a year. 2 before the first, January 1st, and 2 times after. So we are going to teach them and push down to them components. The threat assessment methodology that we're going to use is called the Model-Based Vulnerability Assessment, MBVA. And so we will model our schools as a system, and make sure everyone understands the system and how it's supposed to work, and then you look at to where you have issues that you have to address.
The man at the top of the school administration, the superintendent, is ultimately responsible for implementing the laws and procedures called for in the new School Safety Act. Here in Sarasota, that man is Dr. Todd Bowden. On the occasion of the start of the school year, Todd and I had an in-depth conversation. Dr. Bowden, thank you for joining me today. We're here to talk in general about school security, but more specifically, how the implementation of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act is implemented in your district.
One of the things I had to do was communicate with the Commissioner of Education, as every district did, appointing our school safety specialist, and that was Mike Andreas. By August 1st, we had to do a site safety analysis on every school in the district. And so Mike led that effort, but because it's individual to school sites, it was really done by our principals, by the support of their administrative team, and that included our charter school partners. By the first day of school, you mentioned the school safety officer. We will have 10 officers on the job on the first day of school. We have 9 of our elementary schools that are in the cities. And so in the city of Northport and the city of Sarasota, those 9 schools will have officers from the Sarasota County Schools PD, which is a brand new department that we've stood up over the summer. The remaining elementary schools are in unincorporated Sarasota County, and they will have an officer from the sheriff's office. Over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks, we will move into those elementary schools. We've identified the officers. We're waiting for them to get their certificates transferred, to complete some required training, and then one at a time, they'll move into those assignments. And so by the end of what we call the first grading period or the first quarter, we'll be in all of our elementary schools with Sarasota County Schools Police Department, with the exception of Emma E. Booker and Venice. They already had officers, and we left those contracts in place. In regards to our middle and high schools, we will serve those middle and high schools the way we did last year. And so those in the city will be served by the city police departments, and those in the county will be served by the sheriff. And as we look to next year, the 1920 school year, we will have our police department in all of our schools. But for the entire 18-19 year, our middle and high schools will be served by our law enforcement partners.
Okay, so what, there've been a lot of debate about the two approaches between the sheriff and your own internal strategy. So what were the pros and cons of each that led you to do this, to have your own internal police force?
And so one of the options that was available for us was the Guardian program. And I know that generated a lot of conversation, not only here in Sarasota, but across the state. The Guardian was a prescribed role in the legislation. It was not a sworn law enforcement officer. And so our board debated that option and decided, you know, we really want law enforcement in our schools. And so the next option was, were we going to provide the option, provide the officer through our own internal police department, or were we going to extend those contracts that we had at middle and high school into the elementaries? And the sheriff came forward with an idea that he termed SRD2s. What he said is, in your elementary schools, what you need is an officer for the 180 days of school. You don't need an officer that's employed 365 days a year. And so he presented to us that option. It's certainly something that got our attention. We went back to him and said, is that something you'd be willing to do in every elementary school in Sarasota County? And he said that he'd only be comfortable doing it in the unincorporated areas. And that really got us thinking of saying, well, wait a minute, if that's a specialized role that just serves in the elementary school, that's something we could do through an internal police department. And I have to tell you, the more we spent thinking about the internal police department, the more excited about it we got. Is when you talk about the sheriff's office, or you talk about the Sarasota PD or Northport PD, they have a wide-ranging mission. There's lots that they're asked to do. This internal police department will have one singular focus, and that's the protection of our schools. I also think it's important that, as we talk about the school safety officer, is that an officer on a campus does not make the campus safer. It is part of a system. And so the fact that that officer is employed by the district allows us to direct their efforts, simplifies the chain of command, and allows us to integrate them into a system of safety and security.
Okay, so what you were just speaking to was the Coach Aaron Feist Guardian program?
Correct.
Because I know in the legislation it says that it's volunteer. And I often wonder about that. If they give you that clause, participation is you can volunteer for it, and how many sheriff, you just explain who's on board with this,
Right.
the sheriff and the police department.
And so to have a guardian,
Yeah.
two things need to happen. You need to have the approval of the superintendent and the approval of the sheriff.
Okay, right.
So in consultation with the board, we eliminated that option for our schools. The sheriff went forward with a guardian program. There are some of our charter schools that elected the guardian route. Those are not sworn law enforcement officers, but I tell you, they are highly trained. They have 120 hours of training provided by the sheriff's department. But our officers are sworn law enforcement officers. They've graduated from the police academy. Our officers actually averaged 23 years of experience, something that was pretty overwhelming when we started to assemble our department. Is we're really attracting some veteran officers with some great experiences.
Sounds like it. Sounds like it. Also, I wanted to talk to you about this helping to identify suspicious activity, a reporting tool called Fortify Florida.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. It's been established to allow students and members of the entire community to report their perceived dangerous threat through perhaps a mobile app. What's that all about?
You know, we talked about the role of an officer on campus. You know, that's 2 eyeballs. We have 60-acre campuses, 70-acre campuses. It can't just be one person's job to keep a campus safe. And in many cases, you know, our students aren't comfortable coming forward, but they're more comfortable in an anonymous environment. And so, be it someone in the community, be it a member of our school community, a student, a parent, a teacher, it's just a way of raising a red flag and saying, hey, did you know there's this condition that exists on your campus, or there's this student that attends your school, or there's this individual in our community that you ought to be aware of. Very rarely is it that we have one of these mass shootings on a school campus where in an after-action review there weren't all kind of red flags. But they didn't get to the right authorities and they weren't followed up on. And that system is just trying to make sure that if there's a sign out there that it's paid attention to.
And that, well, there's a lot of concern about that if you get into profiling and what determines what aberrant behavior is, or what a child looks like, what he's doing, where he is, race, things like that, it's just interesting to see, and I think that'll bear out.
Absolutely. So, you know, we use a threat assessment protocol.
Exactly, right.
And, you know, it's very non-judgmental, and we certainly hope that we evaluate a threat and we determine that there's no threat to the school. But when there is, we're certainly glad that information came forward. And so what we tell our students and what we tell the community is, if the thought is, should I report it? Should I do something? The mere thought that you're debating it in your own mind, go ahead and make the report.
So who, you know, Nicholas Cruz of Parkland had a threat assessment 6 months before this all happened. He went through this process. Who makes up this threat assessment team? Who's in charge of that, and what's the membership?
And so I will tell you that's one of the best things to come out of the act, is that there are a number of agencies, and certainly when you look at the shooting in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, there were all kind of flags. There were a number of agencies that interacted with Mr. Cruz, but they weren't coordinating their efforts. And so I'm so glad you asked about that, because we spend so much time on the officer side of it, is that I've been attending meetings with an umbrella organization in which it's kind of the mental health providers, it's the social service side of our community, where we're sharing information like never before.
What counselors do you have in place right now?
And so we have school counselors at every site.
Okay.
At our Title I elementary schools, we have social workers.
Okay.
We used our allocation out of that fund. It was almost $1 million. I think it was $960,000.
Yeah.
We decided to go the contract route because we thought it got us greater coverage than to go out and hire.
Right.
But you're right. It is not one mental health expert per school campus.
No.
It's not even 1 per 1,000 students, which you see a lot in the literature. It is certainly better than we were before, but there's a lot of work to be done there.
Well,
and,
yeah, I think the act says there needs to be access to a mental health counselor in every school. Correct. Now, access, whether that's an adjunct therapist or someone that has those credentials as a therapist, I don't know, but it's just access. So it seems like it's just kind of very fluid.
So at a large high school where you have 2,000 students, there will be a dedicated counselor. At some of our elementary schools that are in the 500, 600, 700 student range,
Right.
they'll end up sharing a counselor.
Okay.
I don't think we have an instance where a counselor is at more than 3 schools, but it's about when you raise that flag, who's going to respond, and so we do have an infrastructure. Like I said, I think we're better than we were before.
So what would you tell the parents of students that may be watching our show when it airs, 2 specific things they can do to make sure their kids are safe?
First of all, I don't want the phrase to ever get tired that if you see something, say something. You never want to be the person that says there was a flag and I didn't escalate it.
Right.
And so if you see something, say something. The other is our students need reassurance. And so talk openly with your child. We don't need to scare our kids, but we need to make sure that they have an honest viewpoint of what's going on. We have altered the physical environment of our schools. We've added these officers. And so that may be disconcerting if you're 5 or 6 years old, is why is there a man with a gun at my school?
Right.
I certainly didn't think as superintendent that this was part of my scope of work.
I know.
I felt comfortable making academic decisions, budget decisions, but literally we're having to put plans in place that allow us to defend our schools from lone gunmen. It's a different job. But with our kids, they view things differently. And so to draw that out of them and just have conversations. If you're at one of our elementary schools, if you have a student at one of our elementary schools, I would encourage you to go out of your way to introduce yourself to the officer. We want them to be part of those communities, to connect with them and understand it's not just a badge and a gun, but it's a man or a woman who cares deeply about your child.
While armed officers and gun control get most of the headlines, the fact is, mental health support and service are just as important. Case in point, Nicholas Cruz, the shooter at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, slipped through the cracks. He had been identified as a risk on multiple occasions, even after making threats and posting violent messages on social media. He was able to buy an assault rifle. He had been expelled from school. They tried to Baker Act him. He had serious mental illness. Fellow students knew about it. School counselors knew about it, but he did not get help. Many believe the shooting would not have happened if Cruz had been treated. In the Sarasota County Public Schools, Sonia Figueredo Alberts is responsible for, among other things, student care. I asked her, what are we doing to meet the requirement to provide mental health services?
Bringing a full-time mental health therapist in our schools to be part of the community of professionals to really process the systems that we have and use them to the maximum of the ability that student can receive direct services. We're not mental health clinicians, we're educators. So for me, it was a way of how can we connect in our community with experts in the field that can bring that consistency. How do we sustain this recommendation in this plan? It's about evidence-based. So we will be collecting data. We will have an outside evaluator to monitor how our families are responding, how our students are responding in the school, because some of our students who are diagnosed, we're not diagnosticians, that mental health therapists will use screeners in the field, in the clinical field, to really provide that consistent intervention and then wrap around to that family. So throughout the year, you're going to see a lot of not only student training, student assemblies on very specific programs aligning to that, but also parent informational meetings, letting them know if you see something, how can you proceed with connecting safety resources. All our students receive a help card. With the help card, we have added the text line. The text line is a national resource where students or anyone can make a call asking for help, and it's being monitored. And that text line, one of our foundations, is also providing us a grant for us to monitor what type of calls are received from Sarasota County schools. and how we can connect additional resources based on the framework of the type of calls we're receiving. To me, it's about really connecting resources, but monitoring those resources so students are receiving the needed help.
Unfortunately, many believe the Safety Act's requirement to provide access to a mental health counselor for every student is an unfunded mandate. The fact is that as a state, Florida ranks near the bottom in spending for mental health care services. And to get the perspective of someone on the front lines who treats mental illness every day, we talked to Dr. Eddie Renier, a prominent local psychologist and respected advocate for those in need.
We have been for the last 10 years or more just devastating, taking money away from mental health services all over the state, to the point that some people say our state ranks 49th in the nation in mental health.
It says in the Public Safety Act, they provide $75 million for dedicated mental health counselors. This is nothing. Isn't this a drop in the bucket?
It would have been something 20 years ago when we had something left.
Right.
When you destroyed everything, you let everything go down to waste, to skeletons, then that's not enough money.
So as far as what you say to parents on how safe our schools are, when we're 49th, 50 in the country for mental health funding, is this a call to action? This is from the legislature, or will it wane?
Well, that's what's happened in the past. When the school shootings start, they'll all come out and say, we need mental health services, and a month later, they're all forgotten. And you know, I think that our problem is that we have failed to get leadership from our elected officials. They've been absent at the wheel.
So what system would you like to see in place that would help this mental health component? What would you do as a psychologist in a community that you love and you have seen it all? What systems would you put in place, and how would you be proactive on this?
Some states have a trauma response team. And the trauma response team is not just there because somebody suffered a trauma. They're really there to do an evaluation. And they have a multidisciplinary team. It's not enough for just a psychiatrist to look at somebody, here's a pill that the kid is not going to take in the first place. It's better to have a team of people who understand violence, who understand dangerousness, who are trained in it, who understand trauma, to talk to that person, that family in the school, and to come up with a plan that makes sense. So we need that all across the state, and it wouldn't be very costly to train a group of people to respond to these situations. And frequently when we respond, when we do prevention, when teachers are taught what to look for, a kid who suddenly looks strange, they're wearing dark makeup, they're not talking anymore. If they had a number, someone they can call, there's a kid who's in trouble, and then a team could respond to that family or to that kid. Think about what we could do in terms of prevention. What is the cost of that to live in a community that is safe, where people are treated with compassion? What is the cost of that? To me, I'm willing to pay whatever it takes. Because I value that person's life who's sick. I also value the people who are innocent victims. And I like to save both ends. Give the sick the treatment they need, and the victims not make them a victim.
Have you ever worked with some of our schools?
Yes, I have.
In what was the protocol that you were a contract psychologist through a particular school or system? How did that work?
Those work with individual cases. Often they've been referrals for assessments. But when I work with the schools, when I have a kid who has had a trauma, I had a kid who was a victim of a robbery, and he was the victim of a gun being used in a robbery. That child was traumatized beyond belief. And he was going to school and getting into trouble. They were suspending him because no one understood that this was post-traumatic stress. Everyone in there told me they didn't have the staff to be able to give him an individual treatment plan because they were responding to too many kids. And so they could meet with him on occasion, but they couldn't take responsibility to provide the services that he needs. You know how bad that felt? Here you have a room full of adults, there's a kid suffering, and everybody wants to really just suspend him rather than give him services.
But again, it goes right back to funding.
It's funding, it's HIPAA laws, it's fear of lawsuits, It's people who are following the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. They don't understand that sometimes you need to just step a little, do a little bit more for a kid to give them the services that they need.
Dr. Renier, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
I'm glad. I'm glad to help.
Well, folks, there you have it. I applaud our lawmakers for passing this legislation and the governor for signing it. That wraps up this edition. We appreciate and encourage your comments. And you can watch this show or any of our shows on demand at SuzanneAtwell.org or my Facebook page. Thanks for joining us. I hope you learned something and found the show interesting. Until next time, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and we'll see you around town.